What if I told you a single tractor model almost bankrupted one of the biggest companies in American history? Or that a Silicon Valley startup burned through $240 million building a tractor that farmers said was actually quite dangerous? Engineering ambition, corporate ego, and the brutal reality of muddy fields have destroyed more tractor companies than any recession ever could. These aren't stories of cheap shortcuts, they're stories of engineers who went too far. Let's count them down. Number 10. The Big Bud 747. Picture a tractor so enormous it needed its own custom-built exhibition shed just to be stored. That's the Big Bud 747, the largest farm tractor ever built, a machine that holds a legitimate Guinness World Record and has become both a legend and a cautionary tale about the limits of going bigger. Built in 1977 by Ron Harmon and the crew at Northern Manufacturing Company in Havre, Montana, the Big Bud 747 was designed by Wilbur Hensler and commissioned by Elmer and Melvin Rossi, cotton farmers from Bakersfield, California. Their farm covered 20,000 acres, and they needed a machine that could deep-rip compacted soil at a scale no standard tractor could match. Northern Manufacturing delivered something almost incomprehensible, a machine 27 feet long, 14 feet tall, and nearly 20 feet wide, powered by a 16-cylinder Detroit diesel engine producing 760 horsepower. It carried a 1,000-gallon fuel tank and tipped the scales at over 100,000 pounds fully loaded. The price tag in $1977, the equivalent of well over $1 million today. The name was deliberately borrowed from the Boeing 747, the largest aircraft in the sky at the time. If you were going to build the biggest tractor on Earth, you needed the biggest name. For 11 years, the Rossi brothers used the 747 successfully for deep ripping, tearing through hard-pan soil that smaller machines simply couldn't reach. By that measure, it worked. But here's where the overengineering became a terminal problem. Every single component on the machine was custom-built because nothing standard could handle its size. The tires alone, 8 feet in diameter, were specially manufactured by the United Tire Company of Canada. There was no off-the-shelf replacement for anything on this machine. When United Tire Company of Canada went bankrupt in 2000, the Big Bud 747 effectively became unfixable. Finding parts was nearly impossible. By 2009, the tractor was retired from active farm work entirely and sent to a museum. It sat there, essentially useless as a working machine, for nearly a decade. Northern Manufacturing, the company that built it, had already gone out of business. The Big Bud tractor line itself ceased production. There simply wasn't a large enough market for machines this extreme, and the economics of custom engineering, every component made the business unsustainable. Number 9. The Allis-Chalmers D19. Allis-Chalmers deserves credit for an extraordinary fact. They built the world's first turbocharged farm tractor. The D19, introduced in 1961, was a genuine engineering milestone. The problem was that the engine at the heart of it wasn't ready to be turbocharged. The D19 came from Allis-Chalmers' successful D-Series lineup, which had been selling well since 1957. Farmers loved the D17, a reliable, well-built tractor. But by the turn of the 1960s, the horsepower race in American agriculture was in full swing. John Deere and International Harvester were pushing bigger numbers, and Allis-Chalmers needed to respond. Their solution was bold. Take the Buda-sourced D262 diesel engine, itself an older design, and strap a Thompson turbocharger to it. The result on paper was impressive. The turbocharged D19 became Allis-Chalmers' most powerful row crop tractor, tested at Nebraska with performance figures that matched the advertising. Time magazine and farming publications praised the innovation. Allis-Chalmers was genuinely first to market with this technology, and that mattered enormously in a competitive industry. Over 10,500 D19s were built between 1961 and 1964, but the turbo diesel version had a fundamental flaw. The Buda D262 engine had been engineered for naturally aspirated operation. Its cylinder sleeves weren't designed for the additional heat and pressure a turbocharger produced. Under heavy sustained field work, exactly the conditions farmers used these machines for, the cylinder sleeves would sink down into the block. Head gaskets would blow. Overheating became a persistent problem because the radiator lacked sufficient cooling capacity for the extra thermal load. A careful, attentive operator could manage these issues with proper warm-up procedures and avoiding overlugging the engine. But as one expert summed it up bluntly, a tired, overworked farmer is often a lot less than careful, and a smart tractor manufacturer builds with that in mind. Allis-Chalmers had assumed operators would treat a turbocharged diesel with the kind of careful attention you'd give a race engine. Most farmers didn't. The gas-powered D19 worked fine. The diesel turbo version developed a damaging reputation. Allis-Chalmers replaced it with the D21 and moved on. But the D-series turbocharged engine episode was a costly lesson in the difference between innovation that works in an engineering lab and innovation that survives the realities of farming. Number 8. The Farmall 560. This is the most consequential tractor disaster in American history. The Farmall 560 didn't just damage International Harvester. Historians and industry insiders argue it set in motion the events that ultimately ended IH's independence as a company. International Harvester was the dominant force in American farm equipment throughout the 1940s and 1950s. Farmers trusted them, dealers were loyal. But by the late 1950s, John Deere was modernizing aggressively, and IH management felt pressure to respond. In the summer of 1958, at a massive dealer event in Hinsdale, Illinois, where they entertained over 12,000 dealers from more than 25 countries, International Harvester unveiled their new 60 Series tractors, including the flagship Farmall 560. The 5060 was beautiful, restyled with a modern squared-off look. It offered a 4.6-liter six-cylinder engine producing 65 horsepower, a significant jump in power over its predecessor, the Farmall 450. It was available in gas, diesel, or propane. Dealers were excited. Farmers placed orders, production ramped up, and eventually about 70,000 units would roll off the line between 19. The problem was discovered in the fields, not the factory. IH had installed a powerful new six-cylinder engine into a drivetrain that was essentially unchanged from the earlier four-cylinder letter series tractors. The rear differentials, bull and pinion gears, the same components that had worked fine in the less powerful Super MTA, couldn't handle the torque the new engine produced. After roughly 400 hours of heavy-duty work, particularly in thick, sticky gumbo soil where farmers were pulling 5-bottom plows, the bearings would deteriorate, fall out of their cage, jam between the bull gear and the cast rear-end housing, and the entire rear end would catastrophically fail. The failure rate wasn't universal. The actual number of tractors that physically broke down was relatively small compared to total production, and mostly regional. But the failures were spectacular and catastrophic when they happened, and by 1959, 2/3 of American households had telephones. Bad news traveled fast. Word spread from the field to the feed store to the phone lines, and suddenly the entire 560 line and International Harvester's reputation was under attack. In mid-1959, IH issued a full recall of all 460, 560, and 6060 tractors, whether or not they had shown any problems. Every single one had its rear end replaced with a redesigned, properly engineered drivetrain. The cost of that recall was estimated at $19 million, which in today's money exceeds $14 million. Repair teams worked nights and weekends across the Midwest to fix machines on site. Number 7. The Lamborghini Tractor. Here's a story that's technically a partial success, but still perfectly illustrates how over-engineering ambition can destroy the original business, even if it creates something magnificent in the process. Ferruccio Lamborghini founded Lamborghini Trattori in 1948 in Cento, Italy, building his first tractors from salvaged Allied military surplus. He was a mechanical genius, and his tractors were known for exceptional quality. Over 80% of components were manufactured in-house to ensure standards that outside suppliers couldn't match. By the early 1960s, Lamborghini Trattori was the third best-selling tractor manufacturer in Italy, producing 5,000 units per year and growing. Then Ferruccio's ambitions expanded. The famous story goes that his Ferrari kept having clutch problems, and when he traced the fault, he discovered Ferrari was using the same clutch components he sourced for his tractors. Components he bought for 10 lire that Ferrari charged him 1,000 lire to replace. Ferruccio confronted Enzo Ferrari directly, and Ferrari reportedly snapped that the problem was the driver, not the car, and told him to go back to his tractors. That insult launched Automobili Lamborghini. Ferruccio poured his tractor profits into building a grand touring car company, hiring engineers away from Ferrari and establishing a factory at Sant'Agata Bolognese. The 350 GT arrived in 1963 and the legendary Miura in 1966. The car company was brilliant, but it consumed enormous resources and attention. Number 6. The Case 1200 Traction King. J.I. Case built some of the most practical and reliable farm equipment in American history. So when they entered the four-wheel drive tractor market in 1964 with the 1200 Traction King, farmers and dealers paid attention. What they got was a machine with genuinely clever engineering and one deeply flawed decision at its core that would haunt the entire product line. The 1200 was born quickly. In 1963, Case management recognized that four-wheel drive tractors were the future of high-power farming. Two-wheel drive machines, regardless of how much ballast you added, couldn't fully convert big engine power into ground traction. Wagner and Steiger were already selling articulated four-wheel drive machines, and John Deere had made a costly failed attempt with the 8010. Case saw an opening. They set a development timeline that moved from concept to full production in barely over a year. To keep costs manageable, Case used existing components wherever possible. The chassis came from their W12 Terra loader, an industrial loader. The transmission was an off-the-shelf clock 6-speed unit. The axles were Eaton components from their industrial catalog. Four-wheel hydraulic steering was a genuine innovation. The 1200 was reputedly the first tractor to offer coordinated front and rear steering, front only, rear only, or crab steering, giving it remarkable maneuverability for a machine of its size. But the engine decision was where the trouble lived. Case engineers wanted to use their own 451 cubic inch 6-cylinder diesel, the same Lenovacell indirect injection engine used in their standard line. Marketing objected immediately. At its naturally aspirated rating, the 451 would produce roughly 105 PTO horsepower, which would put the 1200 dead last in its class right out of the gate. The engineering solution was to turbocharge it. Here was the fundamental problem. Turbocharging a Lenovacell indirect injection diesel is inherently difficult. The Lenova combustion system injects fuel across the chamber into a specific cell where combustion initiates, a design that works well without forced induction but is disrupted by the increased airflow a turbocharger produces. To make it work, Case engineers had to significantly redesign the engine's internals, and even then the solution was imperfect. Number 5. The Massey Ferguson 1200. Massey Ferguson was once the single largest tractor manufacturer in the world by global market share. They were headquartered in Toronto, sold machines across 140 countries, and represented Canadian industrial ambition at its most impressive. And then they made a series of decisions, including launching products far beyond their financial capacity to support, that drove them to the edge of complete collapse. The MF-1200 was Massey Ferguson's attempt to enter the large articulated four-wheel drive tractor market in 1972, competing directly against American-built machines like the Steiger. Articulated tractors were the premium product of the era. Large prairie operations needed the traction and horsepower they delivered. Massey Ferguson's entry was technically capable, with a turbocharged Perkins diesel and articulated steering. But it was expensive to develop, expensive to produce, and required dealer network investments that Massey couldn't adequately support globally. More critically, the MF-1200 was part of a broader expansion strategy that saw Massey investing heavily in new product lines simultaneously at a time when commodity prices were volatile and interest rates were rising. The company's debt load became crushing. By the late 1970s, Massey Ferguson was in full financial crisis, requiring a massive Canadian government bailout of over $700 million to avoid complete collapse. The company that had once dominated global tractor sales was bankrupt in 1992 before being taken over by Axio Corporation. According to Axio's 2024 report, Massey Ferguson recorded $11.7 billion in sales, but that came after a journey through bankruptcy and corporate restructuring that the overambitious expansion of the 1970s made inevitable. Number 4. The International Harvester 1206 Turbo. International Harvester. Clearly not having learned enough from the 560 disaster, repeated a variation of the same mistake 7 years later with the 120. The 1200 series was IH's response to the horsepower race of the mid-1960s. John Deere had launched powerful new machines, and IH needed competitive numbers. The 1206 delivered. It was the first IH tractor to feature turbocharged power. producing over 100 horsepower at the drawbar. Farmers loved the output, but under sustained heavy loads in hot conditions, the engine cooling system struggled to keep pace with the heat generated by the turbocharged diesel. Overheating became a documented field problem. Engine failures were reported more frequently than IH's engineering team had anticipated. The cooling system had been undersized for the conditions under which real farmers actually operated these machines. Long days, maximum load, minimal cool-down time. IH was forced into a warranty replacement and engineering revision program that cost the company significant money and further eroded the dealer and farmer confidence it had been trying to rebuild since the 560 recall. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. IH consistently prioritized being first with higher power numbers, over-ensuring the supporting systems, drivetrain, cooling, lubrication, could handle that power in real-world conditions. The price of that pattern was paid over decades. Number 3. The Big Roy. While Northern Manufacturing was building the Big Bud 747 in Montana, the Canadians had their own answer to the horsepower question. The Big Roy, built by Versatile Manufacturing in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The Big Roy, formerly the Versatile 1080 Big Roy, was introduced in 1977 as the world's most powerful production tractor at the time, featuring 8 driven wheels in a unique tandem articulated configuration. Unlike a standard 4-wheel drive articulated tractor, the Big Roy had 2 articulation points and 4 axles, each with 2 wheels. The 600 horsepower Cummins KT 1150 engine drove all 8 wheels, giving it extraordinary traction in the deep, wet soils of the Canadian prairie. Only one was ever built as a production machine. Versatile discovered the hard truth that overengineering creates. The complexity of maintaining 8 driven wheels, 2 articulation joints, and a custom drivetrain configuration made the machine a maintenance nightmare in the field. Parts availability was problematic. Dealer technicians weren't trained for it. The theoretical advantages of 8-wheel drive weren't sufficient to justify the real-world costs of running one. Versatile continued building standard 4-wheel drive tractors successfully for years, but the Big Roy itself became a museum piece. The single production example still exists and was restored to running condition. Versatile was eventually acquired by Ford New Holland, then by Edgeco, and today the name lives on. But the Big Roy remains the one-off monument to the moment when a great engineering team asked how much is too much, and then answered their own question. Number 2. The Monarch MKV. No story on this list is more recent or more dramatic. Monarch Tractor was founded in 2018 in Livermore, California, by a team that included the executive who oversaw construction of Tesla's Gigafactory and Carlo Mondavi, grandson of legendary winemaker Robert Mondavi. Their vision was genuinely exciting, the world's first fully electric autonomous tractor designed for vineyards and specialty crop operations. The MKV looked the part. It offered a 40-horsepower electric drivetrain, a 10-hour battery, camera-guided autonomous navigation, data-driven farm management tools, and a price of up to $100,000 per unit. Time magazine named it one of the best inventions of 2023. Fast Company placed Monarch on its most innovative companies list. The company raised a Series C funding round in 2024 that was described as one of the largest ever in agricultural robotics. Total capital raised reached $240 million. The company was valued at over $518 million. It had delivered approximately 500 tractors across 4 continents. And then reality arrived. Patrick O'Connor, a California winemaker who had been testing the Monarch Tractor for 3 years on his vineyard, posted an Instagram video that garnered over 25,000 likes. His verdict: it totally failed. More worryingly, he said, it was actually quite dangerous. He couldn't find a single serious use for the autonomous AI tractor, and found its self-driving mode hazardous enough that he said, "I wouldn't let anyone else around it." The lawsuits followed. Idaho dealership Burke's Tractor had invested $773,088 purchasing 10 MKV tractors and filed a federal lawsuit, alleging the vehicles were defective and that Monarch's own sales team had admitted in writing that autonomy was limited and the tractors were unable to operate autonomously as represented. Multiple dealers across several states filed similar claims. Monarch's manufacturing situation collapsed in 2025 when Foxconn, which had been assembling the tractors at a plant in Ohio, sold that facility to SoftBank, removing Monarch's only contract manufacturer. The company attempted to pivot to software licensing, but acknowledged the timing was untenable. By late 2025, Monarch had laid off the majority of its workforce. In early 2026, the company shut down its Livermore headquarters entirely, terminating all employees and leaving more than 110 unsold tractors behind. CNH Industrial, one of Monarch's investors, recorded a $62 million impairment charge tied to its Monarch investment in Q4 2025. The company's core technology, its autonomous software stack, perception systems, and electrification platform was acquired by Caterpillar, not the tractors, not the brand, just the code, the CEO Praveen Penmetsa later reflected. In 2024, we went through 3 rounds of layoffs, and my lesson to the rest of the founders out there would be, when you need to pivot hard and do it in one shot. The most expensive tractor in agricultural startup history, $240 million raised, approximately $480,000 spent per unit produced, and 500 machines that in at least some cases couldn't autonomously navigate a vineyard row. Number 1. The International Harvester Corporation. Itself, we saved the biggest disaster for last. Not a single tractor model, but an entire company's trajectory. One where decades of over-engineering ambition, from the 560 recall to the 1206 cooling failures, to an expansion into construction equipment, trucks, refrigerators, and everything else, finally caught up with the greatest name in American agricultural history. International Harvester was, for much of the 20th century, the most important agricultural company in the world. The Farmall brand had virtually defined row crop farming in America. They had factories employing thousands of people, global distribution networks, dealer relationships that span generations. At their peak in 1959, the year of the 50-60 recall, they achieved $1.7 billion in sales. But I was chronically afflicted with an engineering culture that prioritized being first over being right. The 560 drivetrain disaster, the 156 cooling system failures, an ongoing pattern of launching new technology before the supporting infrastructure was ready. And beyond tractors, management spread IH's resources across trucks, construction equipment, refrigerators, and other consumer products, believing the company's reputation and scale could conquer any market. By the late 1970s, the debt was crushing. A catastrophic strike in 1979, the longest strike in IH's history, lasting 172 days, halted production and cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars at precisely the moment when farm equipment sales were beginning to slow. The farm recession of the early 1980s delivered the killing blow. Tractor sales collapsed. IH was losing money at a rate no company could sustain. In 1984, International Harvester was forced to sell its construction equipment division to Dresser Industries. In 1985, they sold the entire agricultural equipment division, the Farmall legacy, the red tractors, everything, to Tenneco, which merged it with Case to create Case IH. The great name of International Harvester, the company that had fed America and dominated global agriculture for a century, was gone as an independent entity. The remaining truck business was renamed Navistar International and survives today, but the agricultural legacy was carved out and sold. One overlooked detail. A plant manager at the Farmall facility told workers in early 1981, just weeks before starting production of the 588 series, that the agricultural division was far more profitable than any other IH division, especially trucks. He said that if the market for ag tractors in the 70 to 170 horsepower range were large enough to run production from 105 to 150 units per day, the Farmall plant alone could have bailed the entire company out of debt in a single year. The tractor business wasn't what destroyed IH. It was everything built around it. The over-engineered corporate ambition to be everything to everyone in every market that finally broke the company apart. So that's it for today. If you like this video, then please hit the like and subscribe button for more videos. Thanks for watching.